Godzilla, also known as the King of Monsters, has been a household name since he was first introduced in 1954. In fact, this franchise holds a Guinness World Record for being the longest continuously running film franchise, and we can only imagine the number of movies that were released in order to earn this record. This kaiju has certainly stood the test of time, and today we shall embark on a journey that begins in 1954 and spans all the way to the present day, where Godzilla still reigns supreme. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. Our very first brush with the mighty kaiju in Godzilla 1954. Co-written and directed by Ishiro Honda, the 1954 Godzilla film introduced us to this fictional character who went on to become one of the most famous pop culture icons of all time. This Showa-era Godzilla can also be considered the first generation continuity, and Haruo Nakajima played this role until he retired in 1972. In this original iteration, Godzilla was an ancient sea creature who had evolved into a monster after being exposed to underwater hydrogen bomb testing. He went from being a prehistoric species to a radioactive monster and emerged from the depths of the sea to wreak havoc on Odo Island. He sent the residents into a frenzy, and they soon contacted the Japanese government to demand a thorough investigation of this creature. They sent a paleontologist named Kyohei Yamane to look into Godzilla, and the rest of the film focused on the government's attempts to contain him. When all attempts failed, they decided to use Daisuke Serizawa's experimental oxygen destroyer to asphyxiate Godzilla and kill him. This first generation Godzilla was known for his atomic breath, which appeared in the form of an incandescent light capable of melting metals and causing raging fires. It was also quite durable, and the mere fact that he survived hydrogen bomb testing is a testament to his durability. The terror strikes back in Godzilla Raids Again 1955. After the commercial success of Godzilla, a sequel titled Godzilla Raids Again was released in 1955. This movie was a part of the Showa era of Godzilla, which spans from 1954 to 1975, and this iteration is also known as the second generation Godzilla. Godzilla Raids Again introduces us to a new monster named Gearus alongside the original kaiju monster. As the two monsters faced each other in Osaka, the country goes into a frenzy as they realize they don't have the oxygen destroyer anymore. The Japanese Air Force started attacking the monsters with bombs, while Godzilla and Gearus wreaked havoc all over the city and set the place ablaze. Finally, Godzilla fatally bites Gearus and accidentally emits his radioactive breath while erupting in a roar of celebration. The entire city was set ablaze, and the Air Force finally devised a plan to bring a whole mountain down and bury Godzilla under it. Besides his iconic atomic breath, this iteration could generate powerful magnetic fields from his body. He had regeneration abilities and is also quite durable, strong, and agile. Besides being physically strong, the second generation Godzilla was quite intelligent and relied on strategic planning as much as brute force. A super hit crossover between King Kong and Godzilla. King Kong vs Godzilla was one of the most epic crossovers ever done in the history of pop culture, as it pits two very powerful monsters against each other. The movie introduces Godzilla as an age-old monster who has been trapped within an iceberg, and all hell breaks loose when a United Nations submarine crashes into the iceberg and frees him. While Godzilla starts destroying Japan once again, the military discovers another monster named King Kong. While the United Nations intervenes and asks Japan to use nuclear weapons to deal with Godzilla, the military forces turn down this idea and use explosive chemical weapons instead. Over the course of the film, Godzilla and King Kong sense each other and end up in a battle that takes them all the way to Mount Fuji. After an intense face-off, King Kong defeats Godzilla in an underwater fight and emerges victorious, while the natives wonder if Godzilla survived. This iteration shared the same powers and abilities as the previous version, as they both belong to the same Showa era. However, the American version of this film includes a scene where Dr. Johnson reveals that Godzilla's brain is pretty tiny and that he is a being who acts on sheer brute force and has no intelligence. The movie also tweaked Godzilla's atomic breath, which now appeared as a focused blue beam capable of burning through buildings and weapons. Godzilla's first encounter with Mothra in Mothra vs Godzilla 1964. This version of Godzilla was shown to be vulnerable to powerful voltages of electricity, but besides that he had the same abilities and weaknesses as the other variants. The movie follows Godzilla as he washes ashore due to a powerful typhoon and wreaks havoc across Japan as soon as he manages to get back on his feet. While the special forces attempts to contain him fail, they approach the mighty Mothra, who resides on Infant Island. Even though the natives are against this idea, Mothra agrees to help them and flies to Japan. In the meantime, Godzilla stumbles across a corporation that had been keeping Mothra's egg in an incubator while Mothra herself arrives at the scene and faces Godzilla. Eventually, Godzilla emerged victorious while Mothra died on her egg. The JSDF comes up with a plan to electrocute Godzilla and get rid of him, but the sea monster escapes them and disappears underwater near Iwa Island. Godzilla faces Gadora, the Three-Headed Monster, 1964. Gadora, the Three-Headed Monster was another film in the Showa era, and it showed Godzilla in a new light. This movie played a huge role in establishing Godzilla as an anti-hero who had been misunderstood over time. He eventually evolved into an anthropomorphic superhero and faces off the mighty Gadora, also known as the Three-Headed Monster. The movie follows Godzilla as he travels to Mount Fuji, while King Gadora lands in Japan in a meteor crash. While Mothra tries to convince Godzilla and another monster named Rodan to unite against King Gadora, her efforts are in vain. She finally tries to fight Gadora alone, but he easily overpowers her and Godzilla manages to decide to step in. He works with Rodan and Mothra to defeat Gadora and manages to send him back to space. This movie marked Godzilla's transformation from a bloodthirsty kaiju to a misunderstood monster who helped protect humanity. Gadora's return and invasion of Astro Monster 1965. After King Ghidorah was forced to retreat to space in the last film, he returned as an antagonist in the invasion of Astro Monster. When two astronauts travel to a strange planet X, they encounter Ghidorah on the planet of the Zillions. They find themselves in a difficult situation and finally count on Godzilla and Rodan to defeat Ghidorah again. This proves to be tricky as they have to travel all the way to planet X to face Ghidorah in an environment that is only familiar to him, but of course no challenge is too harsh for the mighty Godzilla, who manages to defeat the three-headed Ghidorah once again. This version of Godzilla can be categorized as the second-generation iteration, and his story arc gradually turned him from a destructive monster to a frequent defender of planet Earth. When Godzilla protected an island from evil, Ibira, Horror of the Deep 1966. As the second-generation Godzilla story arc continues, he settles down on an uncharted island in the Pacific and catches his breath after a hectic space battle. However, he seems unaware that the island is under a hostile organization known as the Red Bamboo, which would take advantage of the poor natives to produce military weapons. They use the natives to create a mysterious yellow fluid that helps keep a sea lobster named Ibira at bay. Also described as a horror of the deep, Ibira was an evil sea monster who had caused more than enough harm to the natives. When a young man travels to the island to find his missing brother, he ends up stumbling across a resting Godzilla, who snaps back to reality. He intends to protect the natives from the Red Bamboo and Ibira, but he certainly stirs up quite a storm in his endeavors to ensure the island's safety. The introduction of Minilla, Son of Godzilla. By the time Son of Godzilla was released, the Showa-era Godzilla had proved himself to be a virtuous character under the direction of Jun Fukuda, who later directed a couple more Godzilla films. This 1967 film was set on Soljil Island, where a United Nations experiment goes wrong and triggers a radiation storm. The radiation impacts the native mantises on the island, who mutate into kaiju known as Kamacuras. Over the course of the film, the Kamacuras stumble across an egg that hatches to reveal a baby Godzilla named Minilla. In no time, Godzilla appears on the island to rescue Minilla and fights against the Kamacuras before facing a deadly spider, Komonga. When Komonga traps Minilla, Godzilla has to give it all to save his son, and the father-son duo come together to fire atomic breath at the spider and set him ablaze. When Godzilla fought a full-fledged battle against the Kylax, Destroy All Monsters 1968. Set in the aftermath of Son of Godzilla, Destroy All Monsters followed Godzilla's life in Monsterland, where he lived with other monsters under government supervision. As the movie progresses, an alien species named Kylax invade Monsterland and brainwash all the monsters to attack famous places worldwide. Godzilla wreaked havoc in New York, where he encountered monsters such as Mothra, Rodan, and Gearus, Kumonga, and Gorosaurus. Eventually, they come together to face a lethal threat in the form of King Gadora, while Godzilla's son Minilla watches the battle from a distance. After finally defeating Gadora, Godzilla and the others face another one of Kylax's monsters known as the Fire Dragon. After a tiresome battle that ends in victory, Godzilla heads back to Monsterland with his son and lives peacefully. All Monsters Attack 1969, an attempt to attract younger fans. All Monsters Attack was one of those films that were created with the intention of attracting younger audiences, and it featured Godzilla's son Minilla. The story follows a young kid named Ichiro Miki who dreams of visiting Godzilla on Monster Island and eventually befriends Minilla. Ichiro soon learns that Minilla is being bullied by a toad monster named Gadora, and the movie follows the two kids as they cheer each other on and face numerous obstacles. Sadly, the film received quite an underwhelming response from the fans who expected to see more Godzilla in action. Godzilla's brush with an alien entity in Godzilla Vs Hora 1971. Fans did not have to wait too long for Godzilla to return to glory, as he fought against an alien monster named Hedorah in the 1971 film Godzilla Vs Hedorah. The movie had quite an environmentally focused storyline, as smog monster Hedorah made his way to Earth and fed on the trash and pollution to grow stronger and evolved into a more mature being. When Hedorah's increasing strength threatens humankind, Godzilla steps in to deal with him, but faces trouble as his opponent reaches a gigantic size after evolving. Finally, Godzilla faces Hedorah at the top of Mount Fuji and beats the smog monster in a showdown. This was the only movie that depicted Godzilla's flying abilities as a result of his iconic atomic breath. Godzilla attains hero status on Earth in Godzilla vs. Gigan 1972. Following the success of Godzilla vs. Hedorah, Toho Productions released a series of films that focus on Godzilla's battles with several monsters. Godzilla vs. Gigan introduced us to an evil cyborg kaiju named Gigan, who was affiliated with Nebula aliens or Nebulans who hoped to conquer Earth. They soon learned that the planet already inhabits Godzilla, who had risen to the status of a decorated hero after defeating Hedorah. Things take a chaotic turn when the Nebulans summon Gigan as well as King Gadora to defeat Godzilla, and they take things too far when they try to puppeteer diseased humans to overthrow the king of monsters. It goes without saying that Godzilla defeats them all and emerges victorious before returning to Monster Island. Godzilla triumphs over another sea monster, Megalon. Godzilla vs. Megalon 1973. Set in the aftermath of Godzilla's fight with the Nebulans, this film kicked off in the underwater city of Zootopia, which faced tremendous damage due to nuclear missile testing. In the face of disaster, Zootopians exact revenge on humanity by unleashing a sea-dwelling beetle named Megalon and sending him to the sea surface. While an inventor named Goro Ibuki catches wind of the Zootopians' plans, he does his best to free his jet Jaguar robot from their clutches. He then sends the robot to Monster Island to recruit Godzilla in their fight against Megalon, while Gigan and Nebula aliens make a comeback. Eventually, Godzilla manages to defeat Megalon and Gigan before disappearing again. The mighty kaiju faces an evil imposter, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 1974. After facing Hedorah, Megalon, and Gigan, Godzilla finds a new foe in Mechagodzilla, a robotic duplicate of the original kaiju. The movie's tone is set when an archaeologist discovers a prophecy about a monster that will destroy the world, while Godzilla emerges from the depths of Mount Fuji. As the movie progresses, we discover that this Godzilla is actually an imposter named Mechagodzilla, and the real king of the monsters soon shows up to defeat him. With some help from his friend Gearus, Godzilla exposes Mechagodzilla and learns that the black hole planet 3 aliens created him in an attempt to conquer Earth. This movie focuses on Godzilla's fight with his imposter and Psycho and Shimizu's attempts to awaken an Okinawan deity that might help them defeat Mechagodzilla. As these movies progress, the focus shifts from Godzilla to other monsters, and the next film in the series focuses on Mechagodzilla's journey towards evil. Godzilla's terrific victory against the combined power of Mechagodzilla and Titanosaurus, Terror of Mechagodzilla 1975. After having defeated Mechagodzilla once, Godzilla once again faces his imposter as well as an ancient Titanosaurus. While the Interpol searches for Mechagodzilla's remains after his fight with Godzilla, they discover Titanosaurus and soon learn that a disgraced scientist named Shinzo Mifune has been controlling the dinosaur. Mifune was working with the Black Hole Planet 3, who used the dinosaur to help repair Mechagodzilla from his remains. After succeeding in this mission, they unleash Mechagodzilla and Titanosaurus in Tokyo, and Godzilla has quite a tough time dealing with two monsters at once. Their fights wreak havoc all over the city, and it is quite a shame that Terror of Mechagodzilla did not do well at the box office despite being jam-packed with action. Marvel Comics variant of Godzilla 1977 to 1979. Marvel Comics took an entirely different approach to Godzilla's origins and established that he was created due to the Pacific nuclear tests in the 1950s. Dr. Takeuchi was quite fascinated by Godzilla, who had been trapped within the ice on the coasts of Alaska after his first attack on Tokyo. As the story progresses, Godzilla frees himself from his icy cold jail, and Dr. Takeuchi assembles a team to deal with him. In the meantime, Godzilla makes his way down the Pacific coast and terrorizes numerous cities before Dr. Demonicus captures him and ends his reign of terror. Marvel Comics Godzilla is best known for his thick hide that could withstand high-powered attacks without suffering any damage. Once Godzilla faced the mighty Thor and survived his lightning attack without a single scratch on his fur. Marvel Comics Godzilla possessed the kaiju's signature atomic breath powers and regenerative abilities, and he was also known for his intelligence, which helped him outsmart the military, among other things. Godzilla's Adventures with Godzuki and Hanna-Barbera's Godzilla 1978 to 1981. Around 1978, Hanna-Barbera Productions worked with producer Doug Wildey to release an animated Godzilla series known as the Godzilla Power Hour. The show was a collaboration with Benedict Pictures Corporation and Toho, and it aired on NBC. For an hour every Sunday, Hanna-Barbera introduced the tallest Godzilla so far in this series, and the kaiju stood 400 feet tall as the kaiju's tallest variant until Godzilla Earth in 2017. The show followed Godzilla as he helped scientists defeat evil entities and introduced us to Godzilla's cousin, Godzuki. Godzuki stayed on board a Kalika research vessel with the scientists and had a special call to summon his brother in dire situations. The scientists also had a special communicator to grab Godzilla's attention, who remained on standby to help them eliminate evil supernatural creatures. This variant of Godzilla was light green, and his atomic breath differed slightly from the original blue flame. The start of the Heisei era, aka The Return of Godzilla. Also known as The Return of Godzilla, this film kickstarted the Heisei era and was a direct sequel to the 1954 film. All the films in the Heisei era were set in the same continuity, and they depicted Godzilla as a fearful monster instead of a misunderstood hero. His character was portrayed by Kenpachiro Satsuma, and he had a lot of powers in common with the Showa Godzilla. They had the same atomic breath, durability, intelligence, and other powers such as spiral heat rays, nuclear pulse, energy absorption, and projection. This film followed Godzilla's attempt to dodge the Japanese government as they tried to keep his appearance a secret and cover up his attacks. However, the kaiju ended up destroying a Soviet nuclear submarine and caused even more tension during the Cold War. While the Soviets and Americans strived to test their nuclear weapons against Godzilla, the Japanese government strongly condemned it and tried to bring Godzilla under control with the help of an aerial fortress called Super X. After a long battle with Super X, Godzilla emerged victorious, only to fall to Professor Hayashida's trap. He tumbles upon Mount Mihara's volcanic crater while being surrounded by bombs, and his fate is left unknown amid numerous explosions. Godzilla faces a new horde of monsters in Dark Horse Comics, 1987 to 1998. After Dark Horse Comics acquired the comic rights to Godzilla in 1987, they released a series of comics surrounding the kaiju over 12 years until 1998. This variant of Godzilla often faced the G-Force team, which was inspired by the Fantastic Four in the absence of other kaiju. Since Dark Horse Comics failed to get the licenses for other kaijus, they created a world of monsters and enemies that would torment Godzilla through his 12-year-long comic run. The comics did not perform as well as they thought, which led to them scrapping their plans to introduce a new range of evil monsters created by an evil scientist named Dr. Yamazaki. These comics also did not introduce Godzilla as a hero or villain and depicted him as a monster who was less evil than whichever vicious entity he was facing at the time. His origins were shrouded in mystery, much like the Heisei incarnations that we will now explore. Godzilla's return from Mount Mihara in Godzilla vs Bolante, 1989. After falling into a volcanic crater in The Return of Godzilla, the Heisei iteration appeared in Godzilla vs Bolante in 1989. While Godzilla had disappeared from the picture, he piqued the curiosity of governments and terrorist organizations alike, who strived to get their hands on his bodily cells. Several years later, Dr. Shiragami used one of his cells to revive his dead daughter's cells within a rose and accidentally created the kaiju Bolante. At the same time, a terrorist organization known as Biomajor frees Godzilla from his volcanic prison, who immediately senses the presence of another kaiju. The movie follows Godzilla's fights against Bolante, and the two end up causing unimaginable damage to humanity in their greed to emerge victorious. The movie especially highlighted Godzilla's durability, as the JSDF stored and used his bodily cells to engineer the anti-nuclear energy bacteria that could break down nuclear matter. Godzilla's birth story revealed in Godzilla vs King Ghidorah, 1991. After a long break, this movie reintroduced Godzilla's arch-enemy, King Ghidorah. The movie also established that Godzilla came into existence when a dinosaur named Godzillasaurus mutated as a result of nuclear radiation. Godzilla vs King Ghidorah was set in Japan in 1991, where a bunch of Futurians traveled from the year 2204 to warn them about Godzilla. The Futurians state that Godzilla will destroy Japan after feeding off nuclear power in the future, and that they can fix this by traveling to the 1940s to stop his creation. As the plot unfolds, we learn that this was an elaborate scheme plotted by the Futurians to trigger the creation of King Ghidorah and use him to conquer Japan. Godzilla soon manages to defeat Ghidorah, and one of the Futurians then travels to the future to bring back a cybernetic version of Ghidorah named Mecha King Ghidorah. While Godzilla manages to defeat the cybernetic Ghidorah, he loses all his energy and sinks to the bottom of the sea. As the film ends, we see Godzilla awaken on the ocean floor, surrounded by Mecha Ghidorah's remains. Godzilla displayed enhanced regenerative abilities in this film, especially whenever he feeds on nuclear energy. This variant was considered psychic to some extent, and he seemed to remember the distant past. Godzilla vs Mothra, The Battle for Earth, 1992. This 1992 film is set in the midst of a climate change crisis on Earth, where a meteorite awakens Godzilla and another evil being known as Batra. While the localities worship goddess Mothra and summon her to Earth, two magical fairies known as Cosmos arrive on Earth to warn them about the incoming threats. They leave behind an egg hatched by goddess Mothra, who eventually faces Godzilla and fends for herself. While the two superpowered monsters fight each other, Batra arrives at the scene and fights by Mothra's side to get rid of Godzilla. Eventually, Godzilla kills Batra by firing his atomic breath at an open wound and then dropping his body over an ocean. While Mothra manages to get a hold of Godzilla, she drops him in shock after witnessing Batra's death, and the kaiju plummets to the depths of the ocean. This iteration of Godzilla displayed tremendous resistance to extreme temperatures and even survived in molten magma after falling into a volcanic fault.
Commence discharge.
Godzilla struggles against Super Mechagodzilla in Godzilla vs Mechagodzilla 2, 1993. After having faced enough trouble while dealing with the likes of Godzilla, Mothra, and Ghidorah, this movie focused on Japan's attempt to build an anti-Godzilla machine in collaboration with the United Nations Godzilla Countermeasure Center. After creating the Mechagodzilla, they get wind of a mysterious egg that was kept hidden away by a rodent and focused on getting their hands on it. While they acquire the egg, it hatches to reveal a baby Godzilla, and the original Godzilla senses his presence telepathically. Determined to ensure his child's safety, Godzilla makes his way to the shore and faces Mecha Godzilla during his attempt to rescue his baby. However, Mecha Godzilla's body soon combines with a gunship Garuda to create Super Mecha Godzilla, who manages to overpower Godzilla. While Godzilla struggles to amass energy, Super Mecha Godzilla kills Rodan, whose body crashes on top of Godzilla's and regenerates him. In a miraculous turn of events, Godzilla becomes twice as powerful as before and destroys Super Mecha Godzilla before rescuing his baby. When Godzilla faced his evil self in the form of Space Godzilla, 1994. After returning to the ocean with his baby, Godzilla re-emerged on the shore to fight against Space Godzilla, who posed a threat to humanity as well as baby Godzilla. Space Godzilla's existence is a mysterious space phenomenon, as he was created due to cross-pollination after Bolante escaped to a black hole. This led to the creation of Space Godzilla, a variant best known for the sharp, formidable spikes that protected his entire body. When Space Godzilla proved to be a threat to humans, Godzilla stepped in to defeat him in this film that marked the 40th anniversary of the series. This iteration of Godzilla was quite intelligent, and he figured out that Space Godzilla was drawing energy from the Fukuoka Tower in no time. Moreover, Godzilla came up with new ways to defeat Space Godzilla after realizing he could generate a temporary crystal shield to deflect his atomic breath. This iteration could also generate a spiral red heat ray that was over 1,000,000 degrees Celsius in temperature, with the ability to burn down an entire city. In a face-off with Space Godzilla, he used a nuclear fission heat ray that reached a temperature of 900,000 Celsius and projected an even more destructive beam than the red heat ray. The Burning Godzilla from Godzilla Vs Destroyer. After defeating Space Godzilla, Godzilla ended up on Boss Island, where he was caught up in an unfortunate explosion of uranium deposits. This triggered his transformation into the powerful Burning Godzilla, whose internal nuclear reactor seems to be at risk of exploding at any moment. While exposure to radiation had momentarily enhanced his power and regeneration abilities, his reactor could not bear this load, and it was breaking down faster than his G-cells could heal it. While his reactor's explosion could end the world, things worsened when a colony of Precambrian crustaceans mutate to form a monster known as Destroyer. In such a high-stakes situation, humankind bets on Destroyer to get rid of Godzilla before his nuclear reactor explodes, and all hell breaks loose when the two monsters are pitted against each other. Godzilla vs. Destroyer marked the end of the Heisei era, as Toho Productions decided to make room for TriStar's much-anticipated Godzilla film. A promotional stunt in the form of Godzilland and Godzilland 2. Adventure. Godzilland, also known as Godzilland, was a television series from 1992 that was created to promote Godzilla films from the Heisei era. The show was designed as a trivia show with 15-minute episodes where Godzilla appeared alongside Cosmos, Mecha Godzilla, and Baby Godzilla and interacted with the audience. This iteration of Godzilla did not add anything to his story arc and was only created in a cute chibi animation style to attract the audience's attention. While the first season was aired to promote Godzilla vs. Mothra, the second season promoted Godzilla vs. Mecha Godzilla. TriStar's iteration of Godzilla 1, 1998. In this Western reboot of Godzilla, the kaiju terrorized the streets of New York City and was given an entirely new origin story as compared to the original one. When a bunch of French scientists accidentally mutated a nest of iguanas, one of the mutated reptiles turned into Godzilla and wreaked havoc in New York. As the film progressed, he assumed the form of a giant monster who was finally defeated after the military forces bombarded him with missiles from 3 F-18 Hornets. While Godzilla died, one of his eggs was left behind and it later hatched into a monster who appeared in the following animated series. This iteration of Godzilla was created by TriStar, who intended to expand this film into a trilogy. However, the movie did not perform well, and TriStar discarded its trilogy plan to create the animated Godzilla series instead. This westernized reboot was heavily inspired by the original Godzilla and had a lot of similar powers, including his atomic breath, durability, sharp claws, reproductive abilities, and intelligence. when Godzilla was bested by his own son, Godzilla The Series 1998 to 2000. This series followed Godzilla's surviving egg as he hatched into a baby Godzilla and imprinted on Nick Totopoulos soon after. This baby kaiju started following Nick around, who took him under his wing until Major Hicks learned of his existence and allegedly killed him. As the series progressed, we learned that the baby was still alive and that he had grown into an adult Godzilla. He even won over Major Hicks's trust by helping them destroy a predator named Crustaceous Rex, and Hicks then allowed Godzilla to live under Nick's watchful eye. Godzilla then worked alongside Nick's research team, Heat, and traveled across the globe to fight other evil entities. Eventually, Leviathan aliens got their hands on the original Godzilla's body and used it to create a cyborg named Cyber Godzilla to eliminate Heat. Things took a turn when Cyber Godzilla faced his son, who ripped out his robotic arm and killed him. A new era in the Godzilla franchise, Godzilla 2000 Millennium 1999. After experimenting with the Godzilla franchise, Toho Productions found its footing and introduced a new Millennium series. These standalone films focused little on establishing continuity with the rest of the series, and the first film depicted Godzilla as a true force of nature who often attacked Japan. In the meantime, an alien force attacked Earth and declared that they would conquer the planet and establish their own empire. They later learned that the aliens were targeting Godzilla to get their hands on his regenerative gene that would help them regain their original form in Earth's atmosphere. After absorbing his DNA, all the aliens came together to take a singular form known as Millennium, before mutating into a monster known as Orga. Godzilla and Orga faced each other, and Kaiju finally released an atomic shockwave and completely decapitated Orga's body. After defeating him, Godzilla unleashed his fury upon the city of Tokyo and set the place on fire with his atomic breath. The Millennium variant of Godzilla had the same powers as previous versions, such as an atomic breath, nuclear pulse, durability, and intellect. When Godzilla dealt with two threats at once in Godzilla vs Megalon 2000. The Millennium series continued with Godzilla vs Megalon in 2000, the first Godzilla film directed by Masaaki Tezuka. The movie depicted Godzilla as an unruly monster who had attacked Japan so many times that the government had to form an anti-Godzilla unit called the G-Graspers. They built a miniature black hole gun that could steal the kaiju in a different dimension and accidentally created a wormhole that served as a gateway for a Meganula to leave an egg in Japan. Soon enough, Meganula had created an entire swarm of creatures, and he then proceeded to steal Godzilla's energy to power their queen. Their queen soon transformed into the gigantic monster called Gearus, and the G-Grasper struggled to send Godzilla into a wormhole before he destroyed Tokyo entirely. The movie took us on quite a wild ride as Godzilla evaded the G-Graspers while facing Gearus in a three-way battle. The Ultimate Kaiju Showdown, Godzilla, Mothra, and King Gadora, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack 2001. The Millennium series continued with the release of Godzilla, Mothra, and King Gadora, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack in 2001. This film took quite an interesting turn and introduced Godzilla as a ghost monster who had been reanimated by the vengeful spirits who died during World War II. While these spirits turned Godzilla into their puppet, Professor Isayama awakened the spirits of the three garden monsters, Baragon, Mothra, and King Gadora, to deal with a kaiju. In the meantime, Godzilla made his way to Tokyo and all hell broke loose when these giant monsters engaged in battle. Giant Monsters All-Out Attack helped revive the Millennium series and was such a massive hit at the box office that Toho decided against calling off the entire series. While this movie ended with Godzilla sinking to the bottom of the seafloor, the last scene showed Godzilla's disembodied heart jerking back to life and beating continuously. Godzilla faced his cyborg version of Godzilla against Mecha Godzilla 2002. Set in the aftermath of Godzilla's face-off with the garden monsters, this film introduced us to a second Godzilla who attacked Japan in 1999. To deal with him, the government decided to dig up the bones of the original 1954 Godzilla and use them to construct a weapon, Kiryu. After finally constructing him by 2003, they sent him to fight Godzilla, whose loud roars brought the original Godzilla's soul back to life within Kiryu's body. This drove drove the cyborg to insanity, and scientists scrambled to fix him before he posed another threat in addition to Godzilla. As the film ended, Kiryu somehow managed to drive Godzilla away, and Japan rejoiced over the fact that they had a weapon more powerful than Godzilla. Compared to past incarnations, this two-part Kiryu series portrayed Godzilla as a weaker being with low durability. He could not heal his wounds at a fast pace, and it took him over a year to heal a chest injury caused by Kiryu's absolute zero cannon. Kiryu's continued attempts to thwart Godzilla in Godzilla Tokyo SOS 2003. Godzilla Tokyo SOS served as a direct sequel to Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, where the Shibojin expressed their desire to return the original Godzilla's bones to the ocean. The government understood that using his bones in Kiryu violated the natural order of things, but they were hesitant to get rid of their only weapon in case Godzilla ever returned. Their fears soon came true when Godzilla launched an attack on Tokyo, and they enlisted Mothra's help before once again resorting to using Kiryu to stop him. As the movie came to an end, Kiryu sank into the Japan Trench and dragged Godzilla along with him in an attempt to take the kaiju far away from humanity. The Shibojin seemed quite pleased to learn that the original Godzilla's bones were once again in the depths of the ocean, and this movie marked the end of Kiryu's brief but impactful journey. When Godzilla defended Earth against a horde of kaiju in Godzilla Final Wars 2004. Godzilla Final Wars marked the end of the Millennium series as well as the 50th anniversary of the franchise. It holds the record for introducing the most kaiju in any Godzilla media, and it followed Godzilla's attempt to protect Earth from an alien force. When the Zillions appeared on Earth to save humanity from a monster invasion, the Earth Defense Force got suspicious of them and finally learned that the Zillions had brainwashed the monsters to attack Earth so that they could sweep in and infiltrate positions of power. While their plans seemed to be working, they underestimated the power of Godzilla, who worked alongside the Earth Defense Force to defeat every last one of the Zillion's kaiju. A war that took us from the mid-90s to the early 2000s. Godzilla The Half-Century War. Published by IDW Comics, Godzilla The Half-Century War was a 5-part comic series focusing on a Japanese soldier's history with Godzilla. After first facing Godzilla in Tokyo in 1954, Ota Murakami kept running into Godzilla after joining a monster hunting organization known as the Anti-Megalosaurus Force, aka AMF. They had run-ins in Vietnam, Ghana, and Bombay, and even Antarctica in the lifelong war that lasted nearly half a century until Oda and Godzilla were both sucked into a black hole. While Godzilla was depicted as a dangerous monster, Oda was more than a match for him due to his obsessive nature towards the kaiju, and it was very refreshing to see a human matchup to the king of the monsters. Godzilla's striking comeback in the 2014 Godzilla reboot. Directed by Gareth Edwards, this Hollywood remake of Godzilla was set in San Francisco, where he was introduced as an ally to humans. This reboot is considered one of the film's better remakes, and it is jam-packed with action as Godzilla protects humanity from all sorts of monsters. While he relied on his signature Fury breath to destroy his opponents, he seemed to have become more cautious about causing any destruction to civilization. Among other incidents, this movie followed Godzilla as he faced a monstrous being known as Muto, aka Massive Unidentified Terrestrial Organization. Muto seemed to be quite a match for Godzilla as he relied on nuclear radiation to gain strength. Still, Godzilla eventually defeated him and earned a nickname as the City's Savior. This incarnation of Godzilla was a part of the Monsterverse, and he was introduced as an ancient alpha predator who lived during the late Permian period over 250 million years ago. Besides his signature atomic breath, Godzilla could fire a nuclear pulse powerful enough to annihilate his enemy in a single blast, and he used this pulse to weaken Muto before crushing his head. When Godzilla got an entirely new origin story in Shin Godzilla 2016. Toho Productions' Shin Godzilla kickstarted the Reiwa era of the franchise in 2016, which has continued till the present day, also known as Godzilla Resurgence. This movie had a new origin story for Godzilla, who seemed to have mutated into a monster after being exposed to nuclear waste in Tokyo Bay. While the original Godzilla film referenced the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this film's origins acknowledged the 2011 Fukushima nuclear nuclear disaster. As Godzilla emerged from the depths of Tokyo Bay, the government scrambled to find a way to deal with him before he turned Tokyo into a wasteland. The movie was a mega hit in Japan, and its success motivated Toho to announce a trilogy to further the Reiwa era. When Godzilla created an entire ecosystem surrounding himself in Godzilla, Planet of the Monsters 2017. Toho kickstarted their much-awaited trilogy with Godzilla Planet of the Monsters in 2017, where Godzilla was introduced as the most powerful kaiju of the Reiwa era. It followed Captain Haruo Sakaki, who traveled on board the interstellar emigration ship named Aratrum nearly 22 years after humans had to abandon Earth. Sakaki eventually returned to face Godzilla and avenged his parents' death, and he arrived on Earth to find that the entire planet had evolved to create an ecosystem that served the kaiju. Sakaki hatched a plan to send a brigade of soldiers to destroy Godzilla, and humans traveled to Earth about 20,000 years later to discover that Godzilla still reigned supreme. This iteration of Godzilla had a distinctive roar along with his signature atomic breath, and Planet of the Monsters was an excellent start to this trilogy. Godzilla faces Mechagodzilla yet again in Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle 2018. Godzilla City on the Edge of Battle served as a sequel to Planet of the Monsters, and it was set in the aftermath of Haruo Sakaki's defeat against the kaiju. While Sakaki's team survived, they were taken hostage by the indigenous Hotua people who lived in Godzilla's shadow. The Hotua warned Sakaki about the dangers of fighting Godzilla, while Sakaki noticed that they forged their weapons out of nanometal. He realized that the Mechagodzilla was created out of the same metal about 20,000 years ago and traced the metal to Mechagodzilla City. This city seemed to be Sakaki's best bet at defeating Godzilla, but the use of nanometal came at a terrible price that he must endure in order to stand a chance against the mighty kaiju. This incarnation was known for his prehensile tail, which was sharp enough to stab someone to death, and he had also destroyed several tower-like structures around Mechagodzilla City. He further displayed the ability to convert the excess electromagnetic energy into heat and then used it to fuel his atomic breath. An end to the famous Toho trilogy, Godzilla the Planet Eater 2018. Released in 2018, Godzilla the Planet Eater marked the end of the Toho trilogy and left the United Earth at a loss for how to deal with Godzilla. Eventually, the Exif Archbishop Metphis gathered a huge following and assured that they could defeat Godzilla by summoning God. While Haruo Sakaki found this idea a bit absurd, he soon discovered that the Metphis had painted him as a messiah and that their idea of God was King Gadora. He tried his best to prevent the Metphis from releasing King Gadora on Earth, as it would result in catastrophic damage to humanity. However, the two monsters eventually faced each other, and Godzilla's fiery atomic breath clashed with Gadora's freezing powers in this epic showdown. The King of the Monsters returned in this sequel to the 2014 Godzilla, Godzilla King of the Monsters 2019. Godzilla King of the Monsters is a direct sequel to the 2014 Godzilla film and was set 5 years after the events that unfurled when Godzilla attacked San Francisco. While most of the population believed that Godzilla and other titans should be exterminated, a scientific organization named Monarch stepped in to defend them and stated that some titans were benevolent entities. Even though Monarch did their best to make a case for the titans, public opinions remain the same, especially after an eco-tourist freed Monster Zero from his icy prison in Antarctica. Monster Zero's arrival was followed by the awakening of several other dormant titans who tread all over the globe and wreaked havoc. Eventually, Godzilla stepped in to save the day and worked alongside Monarch and Mothra to end Monster Zero's reign before it was too late. This incarnation of Godzilla hailed from the Monsterverse and was especially known for his durability, intelligence, and regenerative abilities, among other things. When Godzilla turned against humanity in Godzilla vs Kong 2021. Set in the Monsterverse, Godzilla vs Kong was in the same continuity as the previous release, Godzilla King of the Monsters. The movie started on a shocking note as Godzilla betrayed humanity and sent Monarch into a state of panic as they tried to contain him. They collaborated with Apex Cybernetics and enlisted the help of the primate Titan Kong to venture deep into the Hollow Earth to find a power source strong enough to defeat the kaiju. While Godzilla faced Kong and tried to establish his supremacy, Apex Cybernetics stepped in with their secret weapon. As it turned out, they had been developing a mechanical kaiju called Mecha Godzilla to defeat Godzilla, but their planning went down the drain when Kong destroyed her new creation. While the movie pitted Godzilla against Kong, the Titans eventually stopped fighting and acknowledged each other's strengths before going their own ways. The novelization of this film gave us a look into some of his lesser-known powers, such as his ability to command other Titans through a telepathic call. It further revealed that Godzilla was the only member of his species with the ability to fire atomic breath. He also had enhanced senses, and it took him no time to locate King Kong in the Tasman Sea. Among other things, his dorsal fins possessed great strength and were capable of cutting through huge ships in a signature attack known as the dorsal fin cutter. An all-new incarnation of Godzilla from a faraway dimension, the Godzilla Singular Point 2021. Godzilla Singular Point introduced us to a new incarnation of the kaiju, which had emerged from a singularity from a faraway dimension. He was said to be a singular point who could alter the fabric of space and time, and it was prophesied that he would turn the seas red and bring about the end of the world one day. As the show progressed, we learned that he launched an attack on a fishing village during World War II, and a scientist named Michiyuki Ashihara came across its bones and passed them on to Misaki Oku. Godzilla later appeared in 2030 during a monster invasion in Nagashio, and a novelization of this character revealed that he was only a physical extension of an omnipresent extra-dimensional entity. This incarnation's powers differed greatly from older versions, and his signature atomic breath was turned into a CTC molecular laser that could split into multiple beams to cause an impactful blast. His body underwent several stages of evolution, and he went from Godzilla Aquatilus to Terrestia before finally taking his ultimate form. He had control over the red dust archetype, which helped him revive his body every time he died across the series. His regenerative abilities are also worth mentioning, and he could create plant life besides healing his body parts. When Godzilla faced his entire rogue gallery in Godzilla Unnatural Disasters. Godzilla Unnatural Disasters introduced us to Godzilla's entire rogue gallery as the kaiju faced every last one of his enemies over the course of 3 comic miniseries. Published by IDW Comics, these comics portrayed Godzilla as an intimidating monster who towered over other beings and had red-black scaly skin. He faced the likes of Gearus, Rodan, Gadora, and Titanosaurus, among other monsters, before stumbling into the depths of the underworld for a showdown with his greatest adversary so far. Every single panel of this miniseries was filled with some good old-fashioned action where Godzilla emerged victorious in every last battle, much to no one's surprise. Godzilla's comeback as the king of the monsters, Godzilla World of Monsters. As the name suggests, Godzilla World of Monsters was set in a universe where monsters ruled the world over the course of 3 graphic novels. While fans hoped that Godzilla would play the lead role in every single one of these stories, the first 2 tales, Gangsters and Goliath and Cataclysm, actually focused on other monsters. As the series built up to its finale, Godzilla appeared in the final novel, Oblivion, where he was considered the undisputable king of the monsters. He shared a lot of powers with his previous versions, and the novel followed a scientist's journey as he faced Godzilla in the monster dimension. An epic crossover between Godzilla and the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Godzilla vs Mighty Morphin Power Rangers 2022. Besides Godzilla, Power Rangers can also be considered one of the most successful franchises of all time, and fans were thrilled when Boom Studios announced a crossover between the two. In collaboration with IDW, Boom Studios devised a storyline where the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers chased their enemy Rita Repulsa as she got her hands on an ancient artifact. In the meantime, Rita used the artifact to travel to a dimension without the Power Rangers and found herself surrounded by aliens and kaiju. In no time, Rita discovered Godzilla and unleashed her army of creatures to defeat him. As the atmosphere grew tense, the Power Rangers followed Rita to this dimension and mistook Godzilla as one of Rita's monsters until a bystander told them that he was a native creature. While they initially tried to attack Godzilla, they teamed up with him later to get rid of Rita. This incarnation of Godzilla was especially known for his mental fortitude, and he was strong enough to resist Rita's attempts to mind control him. Godzilla partners with a schoolboy in Godzilla Monsters and Protectors Rise Up. Godzilla Monsters and Protectors Rise Up was one of the many comic miniseries produced by IDW Comics, and it focused on Godzilla's encounter with a school student named Cedric Nishimura. The comic followed Godzilla as he emerged from the depths of water to teach humanity a lesson after the Linival Corporation polluted the water and wrecked the ecosystem. In the meantime, Cedric teamed up with his classmates to find the Shobijin of Infant Island and enlist his help in defeating Godzilla. At the same time, the Linival Corporation created a genetically engineered clone named Bolante to face Godzilla, and all hell broke loose when all these forces tried to emerge victorious over the other. IDW Comics miniseries that pitted Godzilla against numerous monsters. Godzilla Rivals Round 1. Like the name suggests, Godzilla Rivals Round 1 focused on Godzilla's battles against a number of rivals over a 5-part comic series. It began with him facing Hedorah in New York City, and a new threat appeared in Lake Ikeda just when Godzilla got time to catch his breath after defeating Hedorah. As the comic progressed, Godzilla faced new monsters such as Singura and some age-old rivals such as Mecha Godzilla. Godzilla Rivals was considered the longest-running American Godzilla comic, and it later expanded into a full-fledged series that incorporated fights against other monsters such as Jet Jaguar and Megalon. IDW's comic series continues with Godzilla Monsters and Protectors All Hail the King. IDW Comics decided to profit from the success of Rise Up Comics by releasing a sequel titled Godzilla Monsters and Protectors All Hail the King. The comic followed Cedric Nishimura's attempts to capture Godzilla on camera so that his classmates would stop accusing him of lying about seeing Godzilla. He went out of his way to lure Godzilla out and ended up stumbling across the Zillions. He learned that an alien force known as the Zillions was working alongside the Linival Corporation to awaken a 3-headed evil monster named King Gadora. Gadora was such a powerful force of nature that even Godzilla could not defeat him by himself and needed some assistance from Cedric. As it turned out, the young boy's classmate had a connection to King Caesar, who helped Godzilla win in his fight against Gadora. An age-old monster from the Atomic Age. Godzilla Legendary Comics 2010. Set in the MonsterVerse continuity, this incarnation of Godzilla appeared in a number of Legendary Comics storylines that ran parallel to the Godzilla movies. He first appeared in Godzilla Awakening, which served as a prequel to the 2014 Godzilla film. Over the years, Legendary Comics published 2 more novels that preceded the events of Godzilla, King of the Monsters, and Godzilla vs. Kong. This iteration of the kaiju was a ruthless force of nature from the Atomic Age, and he was said to be a life force beyond the scope of human imagination. The newly released Godzilla -1 2023. Heavily inspired by the original Godzilla, this movie began in 1945 towards the end of World War II. When a kamikaze pilot named Shikishima landed on Odo Island, he faced Godzilla but felt guilty about shooting him down. As the years passed by, Godzilla underwent several mutations due to the United States nuclear tests at Bikini Atoll and eventually moved towards Japan. Despite several attempts by the Japanese government and Shikishima's crew, Godzilla approached civilization and decimated the entire Ginza district. While he returned to the ocean after this attack, the government lived in terror, while one guy from the Minesweeper's crew, Kenji Noda, came up with a plan to kill Godzilla. As a former naval engineer, he came up with an intelligent plan to surround Godzilla with Freon tanks and either kill him or force him back up to the surface. Shikishima played a great role in enacting Noda's plan and flew an explosive plane right into Godzilla's mouth when the kaiju emerged from the depths of the ocean. He managed to blow Godzilla's head to pieces before securing his parachute and getting back to safety. While the rest of the crew members paid their respects and left Godzilla to his fate, his flesh already began regenerating in the ocean, and it is about time we accept that Godzilla is a threat that can never be fully averted. A sneak peek into the much-awaited Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire 2024. Produced by Legendary Pictures, Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire is all set to release on 12th of April 2024 as a direct sequel to the 2021 film Godzilla vs. Kong. While we can't predict how things might change for Godzilla in this much-awaited release, a statement by Legendary and Warner Brothers promises a lot of action as the two titans come together to face an undiscovered threat. Moreover, the film promises to delve deep into Godzilla and King Kong's origins, and we can't wait to see what is in store for these legendary titans. Marvelous verdict. Over the past few decades, the Godzilla franchise has truly redefined what it means to face a kaiju and pass the test of time with flying colors. As a pop culture icon, Godzilla has created quite a legacy for himself, and we can't wait to see what is in store for this kaiju in the future. If you like the content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.